let me introduce you to a couple of people that are just here to slap you if you touch anything. Yeah. So this is our museum collection building, and these are all artifacts that were found in Voyageurs National Park or associated with studies done in Voyageurs National Park. And Catherine is our collections manager. Monica is a longtime employee here that's recently retired. And Melissa is our park archaeologist. So their interest is making sure you don't break anything, okay? Yeah.
They're the monitors.
Yeah. Yeah, so, but that's why people don't get to come back here very often, because this stuff is very delicate, and we have a responsibility to preserve it for future generations. But since it's our birthday and 50 years of Voyageurs is a big celebration, so we wanted to actually show people the kind of stuff that we have in the collection. And
the last time we did tours, it was for the park coin release. We had a Voyageurs National Park coin, and we had the big release here. And we did tours that day too. That was 7 years ago. So you get to come back here. Not everybody does, because this is storage. It's not exhibit. This is meant to preserve for as long as we possibly can, forever even, for everybody. And then you rotate out and put them into exhibit as you can. But exhibits are tricky. They're expensive. They're hard to keep secure, and so on. So you only put out a few items on exhibit at once, and the rest all. I would say in this room there are thousands and thousands of documents. This is the archives over there, how the park operated, how it came to be, all the research, our historic structures, our construction and the blueprints, just everything, how we have done and our decisions we've made are here. And then on this side, it's all museum storage, and there are probably about 35,000 objects in here, and then we have another 80-some thousand objects at the Midwest Archaeological Center, our archaeology. And a lot of them are little teeny pottery sherds and stone chips.
Yeah.
So,
but they're still important because they tell the story that, if you're an archaeologist or a historian like Melissa, you can learn a lot from studying those objects. So,
where's that facility located?
Lincoln, Nebraska.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
So they centralize the care of the archaeological objects from the Midwest region. So many parks have their items at the Midwest Archaeological Center. And we probably have about 4,800 archaeology pieces here in the park from early surveys and so on, but the majority of our pieces are at the Midwest Archaeological Center. So.
Most parks don't have a facility like this to store things in, so we're kind of lucky that we do get to store some of it on site.
Yeah, they've done they consolidate, so if a park doesn't really have a person to take care of it, it's just a collateral duty for their collections. They send it to regional storage areas. There are they caves?
Yeah, there's some near Kansas City, Missouri.
Caves. Yeah. Or over in the Keweenaw in Michigan, they had all these huge buildings left from the copper mining, and that has become it's a regional storage facility over there. But we're so isolated, and we have this really cool facility, we get to keep our collection here.
Yeah, it's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
So let me point out a couple of really cool things in this room. First of all, this boat.
Favorite.
This is one of my favorite people that's associated with the park. I do tours on Rainy Lake during the summer, and I try to take everybody to Harry Ovis's fish camp. This was his first fishing boat, we think. He had a more modern one later on, but this one was found by the maintenance staff, and maybe Monica, you even know the story behind that, I don't know. But
it was on the beach.
Yeah.
It was on the beach.
I wondered if it was sunk.
I was just sitting there,
Yeah, so they brought it back over to Catherine and preserved it in the previous facility and built this really nice stand to keep it, out of trouble and
one of our
situated the right way.
Yeah, one of our maintenance people, we were researching how to support this boat, so that it wouldn't keep collapsing. And one of our maintenance people, I contacted the Canoe Museum in Petersburg, Ontario, and they had all these special instruments and took many, many mathematical measurements and so on and so forth. And I went, So I talked to the maintenance people here, and we took some pieces of styrofoam and we kind of, made templates with the styrofoam in the different areas, used that to cut the wood in the various spots, and then we have it cushioned with foam on that. But that's how we did it. We carved it to the boat rather than many, many measurements.
So will this boat always be like this? There's no restoring or anything, it's just the way it is?
Well, I don't want to speak for Catherine, but I think if she had a lot of funding, they might do
Okay.
it. But
Okay.
yeah, it's expensive and
Right.
time consuming and really specialized
Right.
to restore a boat like this. So I think in a lot of cases, we are just trying to conserve them and not
Right.
let them get any
Worse,
worse.
yeah.
There are things that are conserved and restored. When we have funding for that, the Voyageurs Conservancy has funded restoration projects like at the June Fujita cabin on Rainy Lake and some other historic buildings.
You can see the difference between the original and conserved. And so when they were putting together the Rainy Lake Visitor Center exhibit, we had these old rusty pieces that had been found out in the park at logging camps. And so anyhow, they picked the ones they wanted to go in the exhibit. We have a place in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, and they have a conservation center there. So these were sent to Harper's Ferry, went through conservation for the exhibits, but not everything made it into the exhibit. But if you go out to the Rainy Lake Visitor Center, they look more like this than this.
Yeah. So it's expensive and very specialized to keep things and bring them back to their original condition, certainly. Let's look at some of the things on these tables. So since it's our birthday, but we pull out a picture of Richard Nixon and the pen he used to sign the legislation that authorized Voyageurs National Park. Back in 1971, he signed that law. And then it was 1975, on April 8th, that the park was actually established. And the reason it took so long between those, 4 years, was because the law said the state of Minnesota had to donate its land inside the borders of the park. We couldn't buy it from the state of Minnesota, and that took a while. Some of it was in school trust fund lands, so the legislature had to, pass a bill to compensate the counties that were getting funds from that. Others were state forest land that could be turned over quite easily, but that took a little while. There's a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross, before the park was actually established. But that pen was Richard Nixon's pen. He used to sign the bill, and he sent that
This is
letter.
to the Voyageurs National Park Association, so the VNPA, and care of Wayne Judy, who started the Sportsman's Service here in town, and he was a great proponent of the park.
Yeah.
And they sent this letter to him, and he donated this to the park and the pen, but with the Voyageurs National Park Association, which is now the Voyageurs Conservancy.
Yeah, so that is a really cool object, especially on a day like today, 50 years ago, that we were finally established. Now these are obviously Native American artifacts and objects that were found here in Voyageurs. I don't know specifically where any of these were found. I'm sure by looking at these numbers that you can see stenciled on some of them, if we flipped them over, there'd be numbers on the others. And it goes back to a record, that the museum professional keeps, and it dates back to like how the archaeologists found it, and when and where, and what layer in the soil and all that stuff. Melissa's having flashbacks probably.
Melissa helped choose this. She said, I'm going to pick the pretty ones. So the only one that is actually not cataloged is this one, and it will be cataloged, but it was a confiscation. Somebody was caught out in the park collecting, and it is actually one of our finest.
There's another law you got to be aware of. You can't take archaeological specimens from federal land, so Yeah.
You really shouldn't throw anything.
No. Well, she could tell you more, but these are reproductions of material.
So I have one that looks almost like this, but this is a little more faded. So these are reproductions that were purchased from the Mille Lacs Indian Museum because we had an exhibit in what used to be the Travel Information Center here in town. And it came back into but this is birch bark. Oh my goodness. I can't get it undone.
Don't break it.
Well, it's very tight, but so there's birch bark in here, and then these are porcupine quills that are dyed and woven. So, and these are also porcupine quills, and then there's sweetgrass around the edge sewn on there and so on. So these are birch bark storage or decorative containers.
And just because those aren't like historic, it doesn't mean they're not super important, because it still demonstrates like the cultural knowledge and the materials that were used to make these objects. So having those in a collection are still really valuable for a lot of different reasons. You might recognize it if you're old enough. Probably no one in this room is old enough.
No.
But that was the falls at International Falls before the dam was built. Yeah.
And then there's, you can see, there's like a palisade in the background and Ojibwe encampments and the, birch bark canoes. So this is like early days. This book, we have a number of early fur trade history books in here, which are really fabulous. And this one is from Henry Ewell Hind. It's from 1860 was when it was published, but this is a narrative of the Canadian Red River Exploring Expedition of 1857. Wow. And so this was like the fur traders and explorers coming in, and these are their journals, and we are lucky enough to have some of those in our collection.
Wow.
Yeah. This is another example of the types of things that are collected and preserved here. So these are obviously biological specimens of plants that scientists, botanists have permits to collect certain specimens to study, and then they're added to the collection under Catherine's watchful eye. And other scientists can come back and study them again. Most of the time, and Brian deals with this probably more than anybody, but they try to make sure that their specimens are preserved and collected in a responsible way so people can still use them in the future.
And we were very, very lucky. Paul Monson, who is listed on these as the collector, was the director for the Olga-Lacula Herbarium at UMD.
Oh.
And so he came and he did these, and these are particularly fine herbarium specimens, and we are lucky to have them. So many of our early, because these are from the 1980s, are from this particular person, Dr. Paul Monson, and as you can see, strawberry. And these were collected how many years ago? And you have the roots and, the flowers, leaves. It's just beautiful. They're like works of art.
And you never know what the future is going to hold if a plant becomes less extinct or less easy to find, rare.
Yeah.
This might be the only place for people to study things like this. I hope that doesn't come to pass, but...
Well, we've actually found a number of rare plants within the park, including one that they're calling a type, which means that it's only been found here in the whole area, and it's a type of fern.
A fern?
A fern. Oh. And we have it in our collection.
And obviously the fur trade was a really big part of the history here. So this is a specimen of river otter, and these are the actual tools that you use for stretching pelts, right, in the fur trade. So that was a really big piece of our history, and people are fascinated by it to this day. I am, for sure. So this photo, Catherine was just showing this to me right before I came in. If you look at it, all of those logs are lined up on the ice. So we kind of just figured this out. That's how they got the logs ready to float to the mills. They just put them out on the ice and wait for it to melt, right? They used horses to drag them from where they're cutting them in the forest, and these horseshoes had spikes on there for them to walk on ice. We have an example of this horseshoe like this in the Rainy Lake Visitor Center, which is, I really like pointing that out to people. The horses were treated almost better than the loggers, believe it or not. And these horses were rented or leased from farmers, you know, in northern Minnesota, southern Minnesota, North Dakota, because they didn't need them in the winter. And that's when the loggers needed horses. So they would lease these horses, you know, throughout the winter months, bring them up here to the areas like this where they're logging in the winter, put special shoes on the horses, feed them really well, and then give them jobs like logging, or hauling logs out of the woods out to the ice. You know, pretty fascinating stuff. These are stamps that the loggers would use. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff. The history of all of these industries, like fur trade, logging, commercial fishing, there's so much going on here throughout history. I kind of consider us in the recreation era now of Voyageurs.
We are.
Because we went from, you know, the fur trade era into like the mining era with gold mining, into the logging era, the commercial fishing era, and now we're making money on tourism and recreation. So Rainy Lake and this area has come a long way throughout history, I think.